I'm Dr. Christopher Barker. I'm a New Jersey licensed clinical psychologist, and welcome to Holding Space. We talk about interests and psychological topics related to trauma, related to anything really that has to do with what's happening now in the field of psychology. I have with me today Laura Hoorweg, who is a spiritual counselor and coach,
Intuitive coach.
intuitive coach. Okay, that's interesting stuff. And I mean, your biography is talking about helping people get to the root of what's really going on with them. And that also is like a lot of what we do in terms of trauma work. So tell me more about what you do and what your interests are.
Well, really, it's about helping people make their lives work. I help people with their inner family issues, with their personal issues. Some people I even guide through business challenges. But mostly it's about helping people to find their authentic selves, who they really are before society, their parents, schools, the advertising, the internet, to try to teach them who they should be as opposed to who they really are.
Yeah, I was talking about that with another guest earlier. It seems that it's also often we're getting these messages about what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to wear. Everything from the algorithm to internet influencers to just ads. It seems like there's so many messages out there about who we should be. But, you know, it depends on who we want to be and who we really are. And how do we
Yeah.
find that? How do you
Well,
guide people to
that's
find
the
that?
thing. A lot of people have problems really finding that, and I have some special skills because I have abilities to read energy and look into people's current lives, and also sometimes we have influences that are generational, that are coming through, that are affecting our lives, that actually weren't really ours in the first place.
Can you talk a little more about that? Because that's one of the things I've done a podcast on also is intergenerational trauma. But I'm sure there are other influences too that go across generations.
Well, it is, I suppose it is trauma. I come at it from a little bit, a little, you could refer to it as ancestral karma, because a lot of times energies run through families, and what they're finding out now very recently is DNA was always thought to be based on chemistry, on chemicals. And what they're finding out now is that actually a big component of DNA is actually energetic in nature. And that's how a lot of these traits and a lot of these traumas, if you want to look at it from that point, travel through a generation to generation to generation, and they don't really stop until a person heals themselves so that they're not passing it on to future generations. So, you know, and a lot of times these are triggered by things that happen to people in their current life. There's something happens to them, and sometimes it can be it doesn't seem like it's a big deal at the time, but what it's done is it's triggered these responses, and it's brought up these things from this generational trauma that actually wasn't even originally theirs, but it's activated it in their own life.
Mm. Now, what kinds of things would awaken something like that?
Uh, Usually it's something that has a similar energy to something that, for example, if there's a generational fear around death or around safety issues, a lot of people just don't feel safe in the world. So if something happens where they either have it could be a bad accident, or it could be something as subtle as, they felt suddenly that they were having trouble. They didn't drown, but they had trouble swimming, or they felt like they were on the cusp of losing control of their own safety, that often triggers a reaction which seems overblown for what actually happened to them because it's triggering these energies from the past.
Hmm.
So very
That's
slight
interesting.
things, very slight things. Like maybe, you were about to step off the curb and you just at the last minute realized that you shouldn't, and a car runs right in front of you, and and all of a sudden that triggers that, oh my God, I almost was killed. Okay. It's something, it can be something very small, but it just triggers that within you. And all of a sudden all these fears come up, you know, uh, things that you just go, where is all this coming from? And that's often where that can come from.
Hmm. That's interesting. I mean, I talk a lot about with trauma how attachment issues and also people who are raised by people who were traumatized, how that
Yes.
brings out, their own trauma responses. But you're talking about something much deeper than that.
Yeah, there's so many levels. I'm sure that you've dealt with this, so many different levels of trauma. And what ends up happening if you start becoming, as so many traumas actually initiate in young childhood, even in babyhood, and in some cases birth trauma. Like, there's a lot of people out there suffering birth trauma that they're not even aware of because they didn't really have conscious awareness of it obviously when they were being born or shortly after birth. And there's lots of things that happen, and people end up having these phobias or these fears from it, and they don't know what the origin is because they don't even, in a lot of cases, they don't even know that there was this birth trauma involved for them. And you know, it's an interesting thing, and there's a lot of bits and pieces to this because some of the ways that actually our modern world brings babies into the world these days is traumatizing in of itself, because women were never meant to be lying on their back having a child. It's more dangerous for the woman, it's more dangerous for the child, and the way that that happened is because it happened to be more convenient for doctors. So that is not the way a woman is naturally supposed to have a child. So it causes pressure. That could be a whole a whole podcast in of itself. But that has been one of the great issues in our modern society, mainly our modern Western societies, that has caused a lot of birth trauma for many, many people who don't even realize that they've gone through it.
It's starting to be recognized now that we can have memories that they're calling implicit memories that go
Yes.
back into the third trimester.
Yes.
And so those sorts of things, the things that you're experiencing around you, as well as the actual process of birth. Anybody who is, imagine floating in this nice, dark, safe space and you're hearing people yelling and you're hearing things going
Screaming and
on.
yeah.
And then all of a sudden you are yanked out. It sounds
It's
horrible.
it's
But
not a good thing, no. Well, I myself, there's a standing joke because I was actually a full-on breech, which is very unusual, which means all four paws up and butt first, literally sandwiched in half. So my birth experience was very traumatic. And I always make the joke that I kind of had a peak down there and I decided that I really didn't want to get born, and I tried to scramble up back and get back in, and I didn't want to be born. So that's that's the joke. But it is,
yeah,
and because of the fact, in my personal case, because of the fact that I was so folded and squished, I didn't, when they try to make you breathe as soon as you come out of the birth canal, I wasn't breathing either. So I didn't breathe for a little while. And there was a lot of tension in the room and everybody was panicking. So there was a lot of things going on when I was being born. So it was an interesting time. And we
yeah,
usually
and
only learn these things by, secondhand, if at all. And like you said, even the interuteral stuff, like so many women they, they just didn't realize how traumatizing it was to have violence around or fear. There was a lot of women who were pregnant and extremely fearful for, a whole raft of reasons. But to be gestated in that kind of energy is going to, I don't think it can help but cause problems in the future.
Yeah. You talked about relationship patterns. How can we heal relationship patterns with energy?
Well, I always say number one is bringing something to conscious awareness. Because as long as it's in our subconscious, as long as we're not aware of something, we can't release it and we can't deal with it on a conscious level. So that is one of the important things that I do when I'm working with people, because I can help people recognize those events and actually give them a lot of times more information than they're even aware of. So once it comes to it's amazing to watch, because once the events come and they know they're conscious of what actually happened, it's amazing how much easier even just that knowledge starts that releasing process where they can release those energies. But as long as you're ignorant of it and it's locked in your subconscious, it's literally, that's what people call blocks. That's literally a block, because if you don't have at least, it doesn't there's a gray area, well, not a gray area here, but there's an area here where people go too far, because there's a belief for a long time that people had to relive these events in order to release them, and that is absolutely not true. And in fact, it's very damaging because our brains don't know the difference. Okay, this is why visualization works. If you actually go through the same emotions as that particular event, you are actually re-traumatizing yourself. Okay. It's not necessary to go through the emotional states that you were in that particular event. It's just that you have to be consciously aware of that. That's why, there's some sketchy things going around where people are reliving events through hypnosis and things like that. And unless you're dealing with somebody that is extremely expert in that area, it's very, very easy to basically layer trauma on top of trauma and actually re-traumatizing people through these reliving of these events. So it's a, it's a very it can be a very, very dangerous thing for a lot of people. Plus, when you're under hypnosis, you're actually extremely open to suggestion. So again, if it's not handled properly, you can actually add things that were never there in the first place through a suggestion, you know?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
I've seen that happen.
That's why hypnotic regression and hypnosis are no longer admissible in court, because we've realized that the subconscious
Yes.
is very suggestible. And if I
Yes.
tell you, remember the time that you walked with a red balloon, you'll have a full blown memory of a red balloon, and you
Exactly.
may never have had that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were some people that were extremely skilled at hypnotic regression, but none of those people are around anymore. But there's a lot of people that say they are, but I always caution my clients to be to actually steer away from that. Hypnotic regression has way too many dangers to actually be a safe tool. There's a lot of other things that you can do that are as or more effective and that don't have that danger associated with them.
So if we don't re experience a trauma or a conflict in a relationship when we're talking about it, how would you go about treating something like that?
Well, it's really about understanding your feelings around that trauma. And because most of the traumas that really impede us are the ones that make us feel small and vulnerable, less than, incapable of defending ourselves, that kind of thing. So it's really about taking whatever happened apart and learning, getting some tools and learning how to take care of yourself, so that and what actually happened, because people don't realize there's a lot of traumas that happen to us and they really don't have a lot to do with us personally. They're often things that are projected onto us from other people. And understanding that the woundedness and a lot of the negativity of a specific kind of, I'm talking more about emotional, mental traumas. Physical traumas are a whole nother ball of wax, but I'm talking about the emotional, mental side of it. Most of that are things that are inflicted upon us by things that are actually misaligned, and at the root cause are actually other people. They're not our stuff. It's really quite liberating to people when we really dive into it and they realize that it's actually really not their stuff. It's something that somebody else is projecting onto them. Like even all kinds of abuse, even, even physical abuse, when it's done by a family member or a parent, it has very little to do with the person who's being abused. It has everything to do with the abuser. So when people really understand that it's really not about them, that they're not bad, or that they didn't cause it. Okay, there's a big thing that they're not the cause of it, because people who are abused, either mental, physically, or emotionally, are also very, very often convinced by the abuser that it's somehow their fault, or they convince themselves that it's their fault. That type of thing is rampant. And once people realize that it has more to do with the abuser than the abusee, the whole parameters of the event and the feelings change.
That's true. And being able to really comprehend that, I think, is probably pretty difficult for most people, especially if it happens in childhood. Children are sort of wired to believe that they have a huge impact on the world. It's how they sort of come to
Yeah.
understand what is theirs and what isn't. But, they feel responsible for things. And, even as an adult, you can be blamed by your abuser and say that, no,
Oh,
this was your fault.
absolutely.
You did this.
Absolutely.
Gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically the hallmark of an abuser is to hoist the responsibility onto the person that they're abusing, that I'm doing this to you because it's your fault, you're weak, or you're baiting me, or you're making me angry, or you didn't do something that you should have been doing, so this is my response. And really just being able to sort of step back from that and have somebody else show you that it's really not about you. It's just miraculous how once the events are reframed, that people can start reframing their own thinking, which also starts reframing how they feel about those events. So it's a multi-layered thing, but the biggest thing is I think that one of the things that I really help people with is learning how to really use self-care, how to care for themselves, how to connect with themselves. And that provides inner strength, and that provides people with the ability to set boundaries, to realize what's them and what's somebody else. And that's the important thing. When you can discern where the where the differentiation is between you and your stuff and somebody else's stuff is a big part of it.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And what are some of the best ways for getting in touch with yourself and finding out what your stuff really is? In a society in which basically we interact with people all the time.
Yes. And that's the thing. We are so busy. We are so distracting ourselves all the time that we need to just, in order to start knowing ourselves, we have to stop being so busy. We have to be allotting ourselves time to seriously get to know ourselves. And, there's all kinds of tools open to us. One of the biggest ones that I've found most helpful for everyone, including my own life, is meditation. And there are so many different kinds of meditation that help you ground and help you center yourself within yourself, instead of allowing yourself to be drawn out by and basically remolded, shall we say, by other people. Another one that's very effective is different forms of exercise, depending on, and I'm not talking about, working out 3 hours in the gym. I'm talking about gentle exercise, walking, yoga is a fantastic tool. Some of the more gentle martial arts, Tai Chi and Qigong and all these types of things. The other one that's really effective is music and dance is very, very effective for people. Sound baths, things like this are very, very effective. And for me in my own life, nature, being in the wilderness, being outside, being connected to nature has, and that groundedness of that experience and that energy has been extremely, in fact, in my childhood, I would say it probably saved my life. Me getting into camping and hiking and canoe tripping and all that was my escape from a very, very challenging childhood. So it
Mm,
played, it played a huge role in helping not just helping me to be able to regulate myself, but also healing a lot of the damages that had been done. So it's both helping to self-regulate and also a healing modality in of itself. So it's a very important thing. The other thing is I've really been stressing this lately, is human contact, because people are becoming, especially in our post-COVID world, it's like the lockdowns and the isolation of COVID, the hangover from that is still continuing. I think people learned about this isolation and then people almost got agoraphobic in general. And there's still this huge, and also because of social media, I can't believe the things I've seen. Like I actually was walking in the park one day and there were these two young boys, they're probably about 12 or 13, and they're sitting on a bench in the park beside each other, both glued to their phones. And as I was walking closer and closer, I realized that they were actually texting, but they're sitting right beside each other and they're actually texting each other. And I was so appalled. I walked up in front of them. I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they're going, "Well, we're texting each other." And I said, "You're sitting right beside each other." I said, "Why don't you just talk to each other?" And they're like, "Well, it's not so much fun." And I'm like, "Oh my God." I really have, it really makes me worry about the younger generations because they are grown up. So they have grown up and they are growing up so socially impaired that they can't even have a conversation in person. It's crazy.
mhm. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I've seen even some adults who
Oh,
grew up
yes.
in the
Yeah.
text generation. They will sit at a dinner table together and text each other
Mhm.
across the table instead of saying, "Please pass the potatoes." It's like,
It's
you can
very
text it,
scary stuff,
but
like,
it is.
well, I'll just give you another example because this is sort of similar, but it speaks to even more. It speaks to the whole dynamics of the family. Because I was out for dinner with some friends, and sort of kitty corner table, there was a young couple, and they were with their little girl, and she was probably about 6 or 7 years old. And this couple had their phone, each of them had their phone out and they were totally focused on their phone. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't talking to their little girl. This is supposed to be a family dinner, like they're out for dinner. And their daughter, I just watched this little girl do everything in her power to get either of her parents' attention without any success whatsoever. And I thought, oh my God, not only are these two people not talking to each other and having a relationship with each other, they're totally ignoring their child.
Yeah.
And that's you want to talk about wounds, and trauma. To me, that is, when you are totally, especially when children are young at that very vulnerable age, and you are totally ignoring them. Like, what message does that give to the child? It's like they don't matter at all. They're basically invisible.
Yes. You can't attach to somebody who's not paying attention to you. It really
Exactly.
is. Yeah. It makes it very difficult. That's why people get more attached to their devices than they do to the people in their lives, I think, sometimes.
Well, that's why I was saying that there's this huge importance of, now, don't get me wrong, there's a purpose, and these things are good. But we have to remember they're simply tools. They're not our lives. Okay. We need to be out having personal contact with people, and making friendships and having experiences with other people. And I don't care what age you're at. Okay. Whether you're a child or whether you're a young adult or an adult or a senior for that matter, and it's just causing huge, and because we don't have the same kind of families we used to have, like not so long ago, every family, you were all kind of in the same neighborhood or in the same city or close by. And there was
Mm.
all this multi-generational interaction. Well, there's hardly any of that now. Like so many families could be spread all over the country. People are very isolated. So you really have to have that network of relationships as a support system, if nothing else.
That's absolutely true. I remember the town I grew up in, and I grew up in I guess a medium to medium large town in the South, and it's I'm not quite that old, but it was quite a while ago. And I mean, there were literally people who never moved from one side of
Yes,
the river to the
yes,
other.
yeah, exactly.
And the town was I find it amazing because now I live up here in New Jersey where you can be in 4 different towns and 2 different counties at one spot on the map, and it's mind-blowing. But there was a town, there were a lot of trees, and then there was
Yeah,
another town. And, again, there's sort of like an awareness of your place. It's easier to find out where you are, who you are, and your relatives were nearby. There were family members around, sometimes on the same street.
yeah, that's
And
the
I
difference.
used to ride my bike to my grandmother's house, and I realize how this is sounding to some of you young folks, but it really wasn't that long ago,
It
and
really
that's
wasn't. No, it
amazing.
wasn't that long ago. And the other thing is too, is I'm a real advocate for people, because a lot of people have very damaged families and they might not have connection with their blood families. But that doesn't mean you can't have family. And in a lot of ways, sometimes chosen family, you can be closer to chosen family than you are to your biological relatives. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, in today's world, I think that can be a good thing. But you have to build something. Okay. If you don't have, for whatever reason, if you don't have family, some people, because of death, and they're from an extremely small family or whatever, or they're from an abusive family and they've divorced their family. You have to rebuild some of that. Like that's what I'm talking about, is having a family of choice, having you know, and I'm not just talking about people your own age. I'm talking about a diverse group that you sort of, you know, you have you have brothers and sisters, and you have people that are surrogate parents, and in some cases I know people that even have like surrogate grandparents, and that's a wonderful thing. But we need the human beings need those kinds of connections, and people wither without them. There's a lot of emphasis put on seniors because of this whole thing about seniors being isolated. But I can tell you right now, it's not just seniors. There's this epidemic of young people. I was doing some reading the other day about, and it's because of this, relying on electronics and stuff, that young people aren't even interacting. They don't even know how to date anymore. Like there's people into their 30s. Some people might not like what I'm going to say, but who are still virgins. Okay. And there's a problem here. And the problem is because people haven't been going through the steps of learning how, as you grow older, how to build relationships and how to get into serious relationships. And then they wonder why there's all these young people around who have never dated, that they've never and they can't make these relationships, and the reason is they've never gone through any of the kind of the pre steps in order to learn how to build relationships because they're all stuck on their phones and they don't even they couldn't eat well and the actual article I was reading was more towards young men, but they were just talking about the fact they don't even know how to go up to a girl and even ask her to dance or ask her to go out because they've had no you know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's been none of the precursors, and it's scary, you know, and all this online dating stuff and everything is just don't even get me started on that. That's a joke.
I agree, and speaking as a young man myself,
Yes.
it is hard enough to, like, form an initial relationship, and I was pretty shy as a young person,
Yeah.
and so dating, and going up to somebody and asking them out was a big deal. But now it's kind of like people just text each other and try and do
Well,
something like
that's what
that.
I mean though, because you were like you were forced to go through that learning process. And now that you're, you know, you're an adult, hopefully, you know, you've learned those things, right? But if you never get into a situation where you're, because let's face it, everybody's awkward when they're young. Pretty much everybody's, you know, shy and awkward when you're young. But you get over it because you go through these experiences and you gain self confidence. But if you never go through these experiences and you're never allowed to gain self confidence, oh my God, you're going to be 30 or 40 years old and still looking around going, I don't even know how to ask somebody out because you've never done it, you know?
True.
And you know, it sounds funny, but it's a very, if you think of that on a mass scale, because that's what's happening now, that doesn't bode well for adult relationships in the future.
That's true. And I mean, it's one thing for dealing with shyness, but it's another thing when you throw in societal supports for separation,
Hmm.
which is, I guess, another cool way of saying, we spend too much time on devices. But hey, Sarah Stoneburner, if you're still out there somewhere, I am sorry I never asked you out again, but you were just too pretty and I was too shy.
Ah,
And yeah, that kind of like, I'm
that's kind
sorry.
of the way it was.
Yeah. Hopefully this will, make its way to her somehow. But yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, the separation that comes between us are sometimes the things that we have invented to bring us closer together. And that's so ironic.
Well, that's the other thing. You see, that's the other thing that all this electronics is interfering with. Because there used to be a lot of things that we did in person that allowed us to be in environments that we could develop these skills and that we could meet these people. You know, there used to be dances, people were more involved in you know, sports and mixed sports and there was all parties, there was all these things where, you know, young people and young adults were brought together and in a more informal setting that wasn't so, you know, that wasn't just strictly to meet people to date. It was just there, you know, you hung out and you did these things together and you got to know the people that were around you and that's how these relationships were made. Well, so much of that stuff now is not even happening and there's
That's
just
true.
no, it's like there's no mechanism to naturally meet people, you know, like there was not too long ago. We won't go into
That's true.
names.
And talk about not being able to form an energy bond or any kind of relational bond with people. It's much harder when there's just, it's not really
Well, and
considered.
you don't, yeah, and you don't truly get to know the person. Like this is the problem with all this online stuff. Like you've got people with fake pictures, fake profiles. You don't know who this person is. And even if it's real, you don't get all those cues like you would meet somebody in person and think, "Oh, you know, he's got a really funny, jokey kind of personality. I like him. He may not be my perfect type, but you know what? I've hung out with him a couple times. I actually really like him." But if you're meeting somebody like that and you're meeting them and all you can see is this written profile, you have
Mhm.
no idea of what this person's personality is really like, and you just might go, "Oh, no, left, left." you know? This is the other thing, is because the things that draw us together and the things that make a match really have very little to do with, just seeing a picture of something, what somebody looks like, a few things written about their hobbies. That often has very little, if anything, to do with why we actually end up liking somebody.
That's true.
So it,
It's a
it
connection.
yeah, it's yeah, actually finding a connection. So, and I'll be honest, because I lost my partner about 10 years ago. So I basically spent about
Right.
5 years just doing my own thing. And then COVID hit and everything. So it's basically the last couple of years that I actually decided to get back out there and try to date. Oh my God. Oh my
It's a
God.
different experience, isn't it?
Oh, it's a very different. I never even expected that I would be in that position. But the thing is, I know how brutal it is and how ridiculous it is because honestly, everybody goes, "Oh, yeah, but I know so and so and they met their partner and they're, so happy." Absolutely. There's stories out there, but I think that is an extremely small percentage of people.
Right.
Very, and those are the only ones you hear about because everybody talks about it because the rest of it is just such a mess.
Right. Well, Laura, I've enjoyed talking to you. We have to stop, and I'm please anytime. I love chatting with you. Thank you, and thank you for holding space for us.
Okay, thank you.